Hello and welcome to my channel, I Win to Lose Gaming. We've got another brand new Stygian Onslaught for version Luna 3! Woohoo! Okay guys, this new Stygian Onslaught is something else. However's decided, hey, let's make some weird and wacky fights and scenarios, and I think they did a great job. Personally, I had a lot of fun with this Stygian Onslaught, and the mechanics are very, very unique, which you guys are about to find out. Now, for the Stygian Onslaught, we have a lineup of 3 devious, battle-hardened, experimental, and iniquitous enemies, which, well, they are all very interesting fights, except for this guy. I think this guy's not very interesting, but definitely this dinosaur as well as this robot. These two are some really fun and interesting fights. Are you excited for Durin's release and Venti's buffs? Well, you can be excited at a 10 to 25% discount thanks to today's sponsor, Lootbar.gg. By just purchasing this $100 Genesis Crystals pack, you can save up to 25% off. And why stop there? If you play any other gacha games like Honkai Star Rail, Zenless Zone Zero, and Wuthering Waves, Lootbar.gg lets you save big on all of these big titles. And heck, there are a ton of other titles as well, which I'm just learning about now, and I guess I'll have to use Lootbar for from now on. Sporting a 4.9 star rating on Trustpilot, and having personally used Lootbar many times now, saving money has never been easier. Just select the package you want, input your Genshin user ID, swipe that credit card, and bam! In very little time, you'll get your Genesis Crystals. And users will get various exclusive coupons. So be sure to check out Lootbar so you don't miss them. Just smash my link down in the description below for some massive savings. Huge thanks to Lootbar for sponsoring today's video. As usual, we'll go through each of these enemies' mechanics, and we also have a day 1 speedrun where I believe I ranked 15th or so in the world as of recording and editing this video. Without further ado, let's hop right into it. First up, we have the Iniquitous Baptist, and this thing generates shields over and over, starting with Electro into Pyro into Hydro shields in that order. And basically you want to break these shields as quickly as you can. And in between the shields, you can hit it for about 2.9-ish seconds. And after you break the 3 cycle of Electro, Pyro, Hydro shields, it'll be stunned for about 17.7 seconds where you can just wall up on it. And then it will keep repeating this cycle over and over. Now, if we look at the shield chart that we have here, for example, against the Electro shield, the lower the number there means the less amount of Pyro you need to break that shield. So you would need 12 gauge of Pyro to break the Electro shield. And looking at this chart, we can see a couple interesting patterns. Cryo is able to chip away at all 3 shields, and in particular, it does very well against the Electro shield, and it does quite well against the Hydro shield. And then the other element that we have is Dendro, which also does really well against the Electro shield and also the best against the Hydro shield. And interestingly, Pyro shield is actually the most overpowered overall because only really Hydro is fantastic against it. So this brings us over to what combination of elements can break the shields very well. The first one is Dendro plus Hydro is, in my opinion, overall the best way to break its shields. As you can see here, we have Nefer and Lauma chewing through both the Electro and Hydro shields instantly, and we have the double Hydro here chewing through the Pyro shield very, very effectively. So obviously this is going to be fantastic for Nefer teams because of this, as well as for other potential Dendro plus Hydro teams. Now, the next main archetype of shield breaking is actually with Cryo and Hydro, because Cryo, as mentioned earlier, breaks the Electro and Hydro shields, and the Hydro breaks the Pyro shield. Now, it is worth noting that, for example, against the Pyro shield, you'll often want 2 Hydro characters because that shield is just going to be one of the trickier ones to break, unless, for example, you bring Xingqiu. He alone can definitely handle that shield, but for a lot of other Hydro characters, like Furina, they might struggle to break through that shield in a reasonable amount of time. And the next thing is that while it is in its Electro shield mode, some of its attacks will actually drain your energy, as we can see here. So you do want to try your best to avoid getting hit with its Electro attacks if you do care about your character's energy. Now, some other mechanics worth mentioning is that It will take 50% of the damage that it takes while shielded as damage after you break his shield. However, this is capped at just 12.5% of its max HP. So really, you definitely want to focus on breaking his shield as much as possible and hitting it as much as possible while it is not shielded. Also, this enemy doesn't have a whole lot of hit points because, well, of all the shields, and it has about 5.2 million hit points on Fearless and 10.9 million hit points on Dire. And also, as you can see, its resistances are also all at 10%. So the main issue when it comes to dealing damage against this thing is mainly when you're hitting it while its shields are up, then it is immune to those specific elements. Now we can see here that a Lauma Hyper Bloom team, now this is the release version, so I cannot show Creator Experience server footage in this video, but I did do some runs in the Creator Experience server. As you can see, a Lauma Hyper Bloom team is good enough to handle this, and on the Creator Experience server I did manage to clear it with a Constellation 0 Lauma plus Kuki team, but you will struggle a bit without, for example, Lauma on a Hyper Bloom team. Now the next team, that's the most obvious one, is Skirk team. Skirk team will absolutely annihilate this as well, and it does a pretty decent job at clearing both the shields as mentioned. And on the Creator Experience server, a Constellation 0 Skirk team was also able to take this out on a Fearless in a very reasonable amount of time. And needless to say, in the final row, you can see there that Nefer absolutely blew the other teams out of the water in terms of clear time and in terms of just it being a hard counter against this boss. Now, unfortunately, in terms of other teams, you're going to need a decent amount of brute force as well as just the ability to take out his shields reliably. So some combination of probably Cryo plus Hydro or Dendro plus Hydro, plus then a lot of DPS to deal a lot of damage, of course, will be able to deal with the Iniquitous Baptist, and perhaps some combinations of Nuvolette teams can also handle it as well. So at that point, it's going to be based on your account in terms of what teams you have available for you after being able to break all of its shields. The next fight is this battle-hardened Zubat, and I must say this fight is quite charming, and so is this enemy. Personally, my favorite fight out of the lot. And this thing is a very unique fight, but it basically enters a levitating state at the beginning of the fight. You can see here that it will teleport a bit, and then it will go into the sky where it will fly. And now it'll stay there for a little while where it will fill up your burst, and then at around the 12-second mark, it creates a pretty thick cryo shield. This cryo shield has 24 gauge. You know, if you know anything about cryo shields, obviously Pyro is by far the best at breaking it, with Electro also being usable, and honestly the other elements, Geo and Animo, aren't really options. But it will just fly around and it will create these crystals eventually, which you can break, which will deal a big chunk of damage to its shield. But as you can see, this is very, very ineffective and not recommended. And if you don't break these in time, it will actually one-shot whatever characters on the field. Now, the next mechanic we're talking about is the fall damage that this thing takes. If you break a shield while it is in the sky, you will see that it will actually fall and take damage, 274,000 in this situation. And up next though, what if you actually provide more velocity to it falling down onto the ground? Well, it will take a lot more damage by using Jean's skill. We can now see it did over 1 million damage in fall damage because of the added velocity from Jean's elemental skill. And also, well, I guess you guys have been watching it, but Sunfire Jean, where you use Bennett's Burst and then Jean's Burst, is one of the most effective ways of breaking it, combined with the fact that Jean will also be able to suck down the bat with her elemental skill. To increase its fall damage makes Bennett plus Jean almost a free win against this boss, which you guys will see in a bit. Now, the next mechanic we're talking about is its little cryo tornadoes that it creates when it flies up into the air. And the only character that can really take advantage of this, in my opinion, is Venti. But basically, if you suck in those cryo tornadoes into it while it's flying in the air, and Venti's burst is really the only thing I found that could reliably do this, the tornadoes will actually deal some shield gauge damage to it. And the tornadoes also happen to shred Animo resistance by 35% each, stacking up to 3 times for a maximum of 105% Animo resistance shred. Another way to break his shield is of course with Venti. For For example, with Venti, you can pyro infuse his elemental burst, and you can also shoot the thing as well. And if you do pull it down with Venti's burst, it won't take fall damage, but its ammo resistances will be absolutely shredded by 105%. Another approach you can actually take is to use gravity against the Zubat to bring it down to the ground with Jean's elemental skill, at which point it will be low enough for other characters to hit, like for example with a Pyro character or Bennett. But in my opinion, you are better off using Sunfire Jean instead of this option because of the fall damage. But hey, this is another option if that's something that you want to do. And we even have some additional other techs with, for example, you can actually use Arlecchino's charge attack to hit it when it's in the sky. I mean, it's definitely not the most efficient thing, right? And it's a bit iffy at times, but you can see here that you can do a little bit of damage to a shield with Arlecchino's charge attack. And of course, you can even jump on Zhongli's pillar where melee characters can also hit it. And you'll also notice that the boss took some flat damage, a percentage of its max HP when you break his shield, 10% to be exact. It also takes 50% of the damage taken by his shield as damage, capped at 35% of its max HP. So you can also take that approach to deal some damage to it as well. So up next, we have a C0R1 Arlecchino team plus fall damage Jean team, and you guys will see just how much the fall damage is carrying this team. We can see here that we're just going to use Sunfire Jean to bring down our Zubat friend, and at around the 5th tick right here, you can see there that I started to queue up her elemental skill in order to drag it down for it to take over 1 million damage. And just FYI, the way it works is that basically you pyro infuse, or you apply pyro to yourself with Bennett's burst, and then Jean's swirl will swirl the pyro off of you onto the Zubat, therefore making it take a ton of pyro gauge damage on its cryo shield. So anyway, we can see here that, you know, I'm just really not playing well, and this thing is terrible for melee characters. Of course, if you have ranged characters, you can shoot it while it's in the sky, but you know what? Who cares? It's already almost dead, and well, I mean, I wouldn't say almost dead, but basically almost dead, even though I'm barely able to hit it with Arlecchino here. So yeah, pretty much any DPS character will be able to do enough damage after the second cycle of fall damage. So here we can see, we're going to go ahead and do that again. And in total, the fall damage plus 10% shield damage alone did roughly 70% of its HP. And as you can see, it is basically dead just through 2 instances of fall damage. Absolutely hilarious. So yet another boss that Jean can completely cheese. And in fact, there are some clears already on Billy, which I can't show here, but those clears have Amber plus Jean soloing it with kind of a glitch, I would say, where Jean is able to pick it back up. I'll link it down in the description below. But also another thing to mention about this thing is that yes, you can deal 70% of his HP with just fall damage plus breaking his shield. However, it does have elevated 70% resistances across the board with 110 cryo resistance. So if you do need that extra push to deal some additional damage to it, resistance shred is absolutely critical to deal any real damage to it outside of its shield mode. And hey, well, look at that, you brought Jean and you're shredding pyro naturally with this setup. So yeah, obviously Jean's gonna be fantastic, but of course other sources of resistance shred, whether it's Durin or Shieldin or any resistance shred, is going to be the #1 way you can bring up your damage against this thing. And yeah, that should cover it. Hopefully you guys have Bennett and Jean and some characters that can do any amount of damage to this thing after you break his shield. All right, and there is a list of other clears that I did, including, for example, DPS Venti, Chaska, and now with Sunfire Jean, Yoimiya should also be able to handle it as well, although I was pretty close with an overloaded Yoimiya team as well. But yeah, so a lot of options for this little guy, and hopefully you found some of this helpful. So up next, we have the most dangerous Beyblade in the world, the Experimental Field Generator. And this boss is super unique as well, but basically, if you're aware of what this thing does, creates a gravitational field where you have to jump to avoid its attacks. However, now for this specific version in Stygian Onslaught, you actually get a plus 600 attack buff. And this yellow glow indicates that you got that buff. However, this buff only lasts for a very short 1.5 seconds. So you pretty much have to take advantage of it immediately in order to take advantage of it. Now you don't need me to tell you that obviously plunge characters are going to be absolutely fantastic for this. So for example, Varesa, Xiao, potentially Gaming, and many other characters that can utilize plunge attacks are going to be great against this boss, and they'll be able to get this attack buff very consistently. However, there are of course some other characters and setups that you can use to take advantage of this. For example, you can also use non-plunge characters that can take advantage of this, like for example Mavuika. Mavuika can indeed still do plunge attack, and you can just follow this up with a dash attack and repeat that in order to deal some pretty decent plunge damage. This next tech is courtesy of 7 Please, made a great guide on the Stygian Onslaught, but basically Flins can also take advantage of this. You can actually do a jump, mini burst, and jump immediately after, where both ticks of his mini burst will actually take advantage of the attack buff based on the way that the timing works out. And some other goofier techs is you can use something like the elevator to set up a Mavuika nuke. Now I don't really think this is a recommended strategy for most people, but as you can see here, Mavuika normally cannot get the buff with her elemental burst. However, with the elevator actually bringing her up during her burst animation, she can get the buff for her burst. This is not reliable or recommended for most people, but I'm sure a lot of people can get pretty creative with applications for this tech. Now, some other characters that can take advantage of this are, for example, a character like Arlecchino. Arlecchino here is a great option against this fight because surprisingly, she can also take advantage. Okay, so right there, before we talk about Arlecchino, you can see there that I snapshotted Fischl's Oz with the attack buff by jumping and then using Oz. Anyway, up next, you can see Arlecchino can actually use the plunge attack and then squeak out a basic 1 and a basic 2 while the buff is still active, therefore making her actually a reasonable choice for this fight. As we can see, we're using a C0R1 overloaded Arlecchino against this thing. Now there are some additional notes. The gravitational field is active for 40 seconds starting at around the 153 mark. So that means that this gravitational buff isn't up the entire fight, but it is up for most of the fight because it activates it twice throughout the fight. But now we can see that we're going to have to use a more down-to-earth Arlecchino team, where now we just wallop it for another 20-ish seconds or so before it powers up and gives us that gravitational field. Now you might also notice, hey, plus 600 attack, that's an insane amount of attack. Well, this boss has the most HP we've seen in Stygian Onslaught at 13 million in Fearless and 23 million in Dire. Did I say Fearless? I meant Merciless, probably. Difficulty 5, whatever that is. But as we can see, plunge Arlecchino here while living life on the edge for sure, because this thing also deals a ton of damage, so keep that in mind. You want to try to avoid its attacks, but not all of its attacks are avoidable. So you do want to be able to heal a bit as well if you do want to stay alive. Also, hitting it with plunge attacks will make it do a little bit less damage, so yeah. Alright, I almost forgot to mention, but this thing does have an elevated geo resistance, so you do want to avoid using geo damage against this boss. And this also means that attack buffs are not nearly as valuable in comparison to other buffs, like for example bonus damage, elemental mastery buffs if you're dealing with elemental reactions, resistance shred, and all the other multipliers like crit and defense as well. You want to prioritize everything besides attack percent for this specific fight. Those will give you definitely more bang for your buck. Up next, we have my day 1 speedrun for Dire difficulty. We can see that Nefer is obviously tailor-made for this specific fight against the Iniquitous Baptist, shredding all of its shield and dealing a massive amount of damage during its 3-second downtime. And as we can see, the double Hydra is able to shred the Pyro Shield very comfortably, taking it out in just 16 seconds. Varesa obviously absolutely perfect for this fight, and Durin providing massive buffs to Varesa as well. We can see 3 million damage, well, okay, almost 3 million, 3 million damage plunge attacks against this thing, with Varesa going absolutely hog wild, taking it out in 16 seconds. And up next, we have this insane Mualani strategy. Everything about this is absolutely insane. Archaic Petra Mavuika. We jump in order to get Citlali to trigger the instructors against it. And then bam, 2 chomps, chomping it out of the sky to land a 42-second clear time, which puts me in 15th in the world at the very least for now and for probably a very short amount of time. And there you go, some strategies and approaches for dealing with this Stygian Onslaught. Let me know what strategies you guys ended up using and what you guys cleared Stygian Onslaught and on what difficulty down in the comments below, because this also helps other users learn what they can do to clear Stygian Onslaught. And yeah, let me know if you found this video helpful, and that's about it. As always, I appreciate every single one of you. This is I Want to Lose, signing out.